All right, ready to dive into some pretty fascinating AI research.
Always.
Okay, great. So we're looking at this paper, and it's called Examining Two-Hop Reasoning Through Information Content Scaling.
Catchy, huh?
Well, for AI research, it's not bad. But it's all about how these powerful AI models, transformers, the ones everyone's talking about,
Yeah.
how they handle really complex reasoning.
Right.
Like, think about those questions that take a few steps to figure out
Mm.
who is Bob's mother's boss.
Classic example.
Turns out that kind of thing, it's surprisingly tough for these transformers to handle.
Yeah, and the paper really gets into the weeds on why those two-hop questions, as they call them, are such a challenge.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the issue here?
Well, it all comes down to how transformers process information, right? They use this thing called a feed-forward architecture.
So like a one-way street.
Exactly. Information flows in one direction, but when you're trying to solve these multi-step reasoning problems,
You got to be able to go back and forth.
yeah, you need to revisit information, loop back.
Sort of circle back, yeah.
And transformers, not really designed for that.
Ah, okay. So if they're not built for this back and forth, how are they answering these questions at all? What's the secret?
That's where this idea of information content comes into play.
All right, information content. Hit me with it.
Basically, it's a way to measure how much knowledge a transformer can pack into its parameters, like how much it can learn and remember.
Okay, so kind of like how much you can fit on a hard drive.
Exactly. And these researchers, they use informational content to try and figure out like what strategies transformers are using to solve these problems.
Clever.
They came up with a few possibilities. So first up, you have the hash table approach.
Hash table.
Yeah, it sounds a bit jargony, I
A
know.
little bit.
Basically, imagine the transformer trying to memorize every single two-hop question and its answer.
Oh, wow.
Every single one.
Like a giant encyclopedia crammed in there.
Exactly. Super inefficient.
Yeah, not very scalable.
Not at all. So then there's the ideal
The
scenario.
dream, right?
Yeah, recurrent composition, they call it.
Okay.
This would mean the transformer learns one function, right? And it can apply that same function to both parts of the question.
Ah, elegant.
Very elegant. But
There's a but.
there's always a but. Here's where the transformer's architecture gets in the way.
That one-way street thing.
Yep, that feed-forward structure, they have a really hard time with this recurrence thing, like the ability to reuse the same function multiple times.
Like they're stuck in a maze, can't go back.
Right. So that leaves us with the third option,
Option number 3, lay it on me.
two-function composition.
Two function, okay.
So instead of one universal function, the transformer learns two separate ones, one for each hop of the question.
Okay. So like two specialized tools instead of one multi-purpose one.
A good way to put it. But, and this is a big but,
Hit me.
it's still going to involve a lot of memorization, right? You got two functions now instead of one. And that's where their findings on information content scaling get really interesting.
Information content scaling. Take me back to that.
Yeah, so remember, we're talking about efficiency here. How well is the transformer using its limited storage space?
Right, right.
These researchers, they compare how complex the data set is, how much information is actually in there.
To how well the transformer can answer the questions.
Exactly. And what they found is that, well, the way the information content scales, it lines up best with that two-function composition idea.
So you're saying there's evidence that transformers are essentially like learning the same things twice?
Potentially, yeah. Like they're memorizing the same facts in different parts of their structure just to get around their limitations.
Wow,
It's pretty wild.
it is. But it makes you think, if they're relying on memorization this much, how well can they adapt? You
To
know?
new information.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great question. And actually, to test that, the researchers came up with this really clever experiment.
Ooh, clever experiment. I love when they get creative.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. They call it a generalization
A
test.
generalization test. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine they train a transformer on a bunch of questions, like who is Bob's mother?
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Right, basic stuff. But then for the test, they hit it with questions about fathers.
Who is Bob's father?
Exactly. So it's like, can they take that knowledge about mothers and apply it to a different relationship?
Right, like are they really understanding the concept or just memorizing the answers?
Precisely. And well, this is where things get interesting.
The plot thickens, huh?
The models could only really answer questions about relationships they'd specifically seen during training. If they hadn't learned about fathers, they'd struggle with those questions.
Ah, so even with those two functions, they're still stuck in memorization mode.
Yeah, at least for these more complex reasoning tasks.
Makes sense, I guess. It's kind of like learning a specific dance routine, you know?
Oh, I like that.
You can nail the steps, but you can't just freestyle.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another interesting finding. It's this idea that smaller transformers, they can get kind of trapped in this memorization approach.
Trapped. Okay, now you got to explain that one.
So think back to information content, right? How much knowledge they can store.
The hard drive analogy.
Yeah, well, a small transformer, it's like it has a tiny hard drive, very limited space.
Okay.
And as it learns, the easiest way to get things right, to reduce those errors.
Is to just memorize the answers.
Bingo.
Some college study habits. Lots of cramming, not a lot of actual understanding.
Ha ha ha, we've all been there. But here's the problem. These smaller models, they often run out of space before they can figure out a better way to learn.
So they never break free from that memorization loop.
Sadly, not always. They hit a wall, basically. They've crammed so much that there's no room to actually understand the concepts.
Wow, that's kind of a bummer. So it seems like size really does matter when it comes to these transformers.
It does seem to play a role, yeah. But, there are ways to help them out.
Tell me more.
Researchers have been experimenting with this cool technique called chain of thought prompting.
Chain of thought prompting.
Yeah, so imagine you're trying to solve a complicated math problem, right? Instead of just jumping to the answer, you break it down into smaller steps.
Ah, showing your work, like back in school.
Exactly. And that's essentially what chain of thought prompting does for transformers. It encourages them to generate these intermediate steps.
So instead of a single answer, they give you a whole line of reasoning. Fascinating. It makes you wonder if forcing them to explain their thinking actually helps them learn better.
Yeah, the results are pretty promising, actually. Models that use chain of thought prompting, they tend to do much better with these two-hop reasoning tasks.
Really? So they're able to generalize better.
Yeah, they can even solve problems they haven't seen before. It seems like that whole process of breaking things down and explaining their reasoning, it really helps them understand the concepts at a deeper level.
Huh. Almost like they're teaching themselves. So wait, if they're breaking things down into steps, doesn't that address the whole recurrence problem?
You're catching on. It's like they're creating their own loops, revisiting information in a way that their architecture doesn't naturally allow.
That's so cool. They're basically working around their own limitations.
Exactly. Research, it's really shedding light on how that all works.
This is pretty mind-blowing stuff. So where does all of this leave us? What's the big takeaway here? So we've been talking about how transformers handle these two-hop reasoning questions. And it seems like, they're running into some roadblocks, but also finding clever ways to work around them.
It's a constant game of cat and mouse, really, pushing the limits of what these models can do.
Exactly. And that adaptability, it's what makes this whole area of research so fascinating, right? Like we're learning about how these systems learn, what challenges they face, and it just opens up a whole bunch of new questions.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here? How do we make these systems even better? What are the next steps?
Well, one area that's getting a lot of attention is this concept of native information content. We touched on it earlier, but it's worth digging into a bit more.
Right, right. The whole how much can they fit on their hard drive thing?
Exactly. And it's not just about storage, it's about efficiency too, like how well they can use that information.
Okay, so the more efficient they are, the more they can learn with the same amount of space.
Exactly. And some researchers believe that this efficiency, this native information content, it could be a key factor in how well transformers can adapt to new situations, new problems.
So like a transformer with a really high native information content, that would be like a super learner.
Potentially, yeah. But we're still figuring all of this out.
Right, it's still early days.
Definitely. There's so much we don't know about how they learn and represent information internally.
It's a giant mystery waiting to be solved. So exciting. Where do you see this research going in the future? What are you most excited about?
Oh man, so many possibilities. For one, if we can understand how transformers are working around their limitations.
We can build better ones.
Exactly. Design new architectures that are just inherently more powerful, more efficient.
Gives them a super brain from the get-go.
Exactly. Or we could develop new training techniques, help them learn and adapt better with their existing architecture.
So it's not just about the hardware, it's about the education too.
Perfect analogy.
I tried. So bottom line, what's the big takeaway you want listeners to walk away with after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the world of AI is constantly changing. It's evolving.
Yeah.
Our understanding of how these systems work is growing so rapidly. And, we're constantly pushing the boundaries of what they can do. Even with seemingly simple questions like these two-hop ones, they can reveal so much about intelligence and reasoning.
Yeah, it's like each new discovery just opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we're just at the beginning of this journey.
So much more to learn.
Absolutely. So keep asking those questions, keep exploring, keep that curiosity alive. The future of AI, it's going to be wild.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of two-hop reasoning and transformer learning.
My pleasure. Always fun to chat about this stuff.
And for all of you listening out there, keep those brains buzzing, keep learning, and until next time, happy diving.